Ever felt singled out? Judged before you even speak? Imagine this. You're at the airport, ready to do your vital life-saving job, and suddenly you're the one treated like a threat. Our story today dives deep into a shocking airport confrontation. A black woman, an accomplished professional, is unjustly blocked from boarding her flight. The gate agent is hostile, the supervisor dismissive, but they have no idea who they're messing with. What happens when she reveals her identity? An FAA inspector. The power dynamic flips, and the karma that follows it's an absolute nosedive. Buckle up, because this is a turbulent ride to justice. The fluorescent lights of Hartsfield, Jackson, Atlanta International Airport's Concourse E hummed with a familiar chaotic energy. Imani Walker, a seasoned aviation safety inspector for the Federal Aviation Administration, navigated the throngs of travelers with a practiced ease. At 42, she moved with a quiet confidence, her dark eyes missing nothing. Today, she was en route to Dallas for a surprise audit of ground crew operations at DFW, a critical assignment prompted by a recent anonymous tip regarding procedural lapses. Her carry-on held sensitive documents and calibration tools. Her mind was already sifting through checklists and potential points of inquiry. She arrived at Gate E37, where Global Skyways Flight 712 to Dallas was scheduled to begin boarding. The digital display blinked on time, a small mercy in the often unpredictable world of air travel. Imani preferred to board early, allowing her a moment to observe the cabin crew's pre-flight preparations, an informal part of her continuous assessment of airline safety culture. As she approached the podium, a gate agent, a woman with heavily sprayed blonde hair, and a name tag reading Brenda Jenkins, was busy tapping at her computer. Imani presented her boarding pass and government-issued ID. Brenda barely glanced up. "Just the boarding pass, ma'am." Her tone was flat, disinterested. Imani handed over the pass. Brenda scanned it. A small, almost imperceptible frown creased her lips. She scanned it again. "There seems to be an issue with your ticket," Brenda said, her voice now carrying a hint of suspicion. She finally looked at Imani, her eyes flicking up and down, taking in Imani's meticulously neat business attire, her natural hair pulled back in a professional bun, her calm demeanor. "Oh, I confirmed my flight this morning. Everything should be in order," Imani replied, keeping her voice even. She'd learned long ago that agitation rarely solved anything in these situations. "Well, the system is flagging it," Brenda stated, turning back to her screen as if Imani had ceased to exist. "You'll need to step aside. I have other passengers to board." "Step aside for what reason specifically?" Imani inquired, maintaining her polite but firm stance. "If there's an issue, I'd like to resolve it. I have an important engagement in Dallas." Brenda sighed dramatically, a sound laced with exasperation. "Ma'am, I don't have time to explain the intricacies of our reservation system. It's flagged. That's all you need to know. Please move." She gestured dismissively to the side. A small line was forming behind Imani. She could feel the impatient stares. This was precisely the kind of arbitrary obstruction that grated at her, not just personally, but professionally. If an airline employee was this dismissive over a simple ticketing query, what did it say about their attention to more critical details? "I understand you're busy," Imani said, her voice still calm, but now with an edge of steel. "But it's flagged isn't a sufficient explanation. Could you please tell me what the flag indicates?" Brenda's face tightened. "Look," she said, lowering her voice conspiratorially, but loud enough for those nearby to catch snippets. "Sometimes these things happen. Random checks. Security concerns. You people often get selected for extra screening. The phrase "you people" hung in the air, heavy and acrid. Imani felt a familiar cold knot form in her stomach. It was the casual, almost unconscious delivery of the prejudice that was often the most jarring. "You people," Imani repeated, her eyebrows arching. "Could you clarify what you mean by that, Ms. Jenkins?" Brenda flushed slightly, realizing her misstep, but she didn't back down. Instead, she doubled down on her authority. "I mean people who trigger security alerts. Now, are you going to step aside, or am I going to have to call airport security?" This was escalating in a way Imani found both predictable and infuriating. She was an officer of the federal government on official business tasked to ensuring the safety of the flying public. And here she was being treated like a potential miscreant based on what? The color of her skin? A flag? Brenda couldn't or wouldn't explain. Calling security won't be necessary," Imani said, her gaze unwavering. "However, I will require you to call your supervisor. I believe this situation warrants managerial attention." Brenda scoffed. "Oh, you want to see a supervisor now? Fine. But don't think it's going to get you on this plane any faster. If anything," she added with a smirk, "it'll just delay you further. You might miss your flight entirely." She picked up the phone, her eyes still locked on Imani, with a look of triumphant spite. "Yeah, this is Brenda at E37. I need a supervisor down here. Got a passenger being difficult." Imani stood her ground, ignoring the murmurs form the growing line. The delay was frustrating, yes, but Tay principle at stake was far more significant. She thought of the anonymous tip in her briefcase, a concern about Global Skyway's Dallas ground crew potentially cutting corners on cargo loading procedures. Her presence on this flight, her timely arrival, was not just about an engagement. It was about public safety. And Brenda Jenkins was, for reasons Imani could only surmise, were rooted in prejudice actively hindering it. The storm wasn't just gathering, it was about to break. The wait for the supervisor felt like an eternity, each second punctuated by the impatient shuffling of feet and the occasional huff from Tay passengers in line behind Imani. Brenda Jenkins, meanwhile, had adopted an air of smug satisfaction, periodically glaring at Imani as she processed other passengers, making a point of being overly friendly and efficient with them. A stark contrast to her treatment of Imani. Finally, a man in a slightly crisper but equally airline-standard suit approached. His name tag read, Marcus Thorne, Customer Service Supervisor. He had a harried look, the kind worn by those perpetually putting out small fires. "Brenda, what's the issue here?" Thorne asked, his voice a low rumble, not immediately addressing Imani. "This passenger," Brenda began, gesturing towards Imani with a flick of her pen. Her boarding pass was flagged by the system. I told her she needed to step aside for further checks, and she became argumentative and demanded to see you. She's holding up the entire boarding process." Thorne turned to Imani, his expression one of weary impatience. "Ma'am, I understand your frustration, but if the system flags your ticket, we have procedures we need to follow. It's for the safety and security of everyone." "Mr. Thorne," Imani began, her voice measured, "I appreciate the importance of safety procedures. In fact, my entire career is dedicated to them. However, Ms. Jenkins has been unable to provide any specific reason for this flag. She merely stated it was flagged and then made a rather inappropriate comment about you people often being selected for extra screening." Thorne's eyes flickered towards Brenda, a hint of something unreadable in his gaze before returning to Imani. "Inappropriate comments are not tolerated, and I'll address that with Ms. Jenkins privately. However, However, the flag remains. Sometimes these are random. Sometimes they're triggered by last-minute changes or any number of things. The point is, we need to verify a few things. Verify what specifically, Imani pressed. My identification is valid. My ticket was purchased through standard channels and confirmed. If there's a specific concern, please articulate it. Otherwise, this feels less like a procedural matter and more like targeted harassment. Thorne stiffened. Harassment is a strong word, ma'am. We're just trying to do our jobs. And I am trying to do mine, Imani stated. This delay is impacting my ability to conduct official FAA business in Dallas, which I assure you also pertains to the safety and security of the flying public. The mention of FAA business didn't seem to register or impress Thorne. He likely heard all sorts of reasons from passengers trying to expedite their travel. Look, I can have someone from our ticketing desk try to sort this out, but it will take time. Or you can submit to a quick additional security verification right here. It's your choice, but this plane needs to depart. Imani could see the condescension in his eyes. He was treating her like a nuisance, someone making a fuss over nothing, perhaps trying to pull a fast one. The anonymous tip about Global Skyway's Dallas operations echoed in her mind. This airline, from the gate to its supervisory staff, was demonstrating a troubling pattern of dismissiveness. An additional security verification, Imani asked, conducted by whom, Ms. Jenkins, who has already displayed considerable bias, or yourself, who seems intent on downplaying her behavior and my concerns. She paused, letting her words sink in. No, I don't think that will be appropriate or sufficient. Thorne crossed his arms. Ma'am, I'm trying to be reasonable here. If you continue to be uncooperative, we will have no choice but to deny you boarding. This was the critical juncture. Imani had hoped for a more professional de-escalating response. Instead, she was met with a doubling down of obstruction. The other passengers were now openly murmuring, some looking annoyed at Imani, others looking uncomfortable with the gate agent's attitudes. Imani reached into her jacket pocket, her movements deliberate. She pulled out her leather credential case. She flipped it open, not with a flourish, but with a grave seriousness. Mr. Thorne, Ms. Jenkins, she said, her voice clear and resonant, cutting through the noise of the concourse. My name is Imani Walker. Walker. I am a Federal Aviation Administration Aviation Safety Inspector. She held up the badge and her credentials, ensuring both could see them clearly. Badge number 70749. I am on official time-sensitive business directly pertaining to the operational safety of your airline. This flight specifically is part of my itinerary for that purpose. The effect was instantaneous and profound. Brenda Jenkins's smug expression dissolved, replaced by a slack-jawed shock. Her heavily sprayed hair suddenly seemed less a statement of style and more a ridiculous helmet. Her face paled visibly under her makeup. Marcus Thorne's jaw tightened. His eyes, which had been dismissive, now darted from the badge to Imani's face, a flicker of panic dawning within them. The color drained from his face too. He uncrossed his arms, his posture suddenly less confrontational, almost deferential. FAA, he stammered the single word, barely a whisper. Yes, FAA, Imani confirmed, her eyes like chips of ice. And the flag on my ticket, Ms. Jenkins, Supervisor Thorne, I suspect it was less about system errors and more about operator bias. Now I have been polite. I have been patient. But my patience has run out. I am boarding this aircraft, as is my right and my duty, and I strongly suggest, she added, her gaze sweeping over both of them, that you do nothing further to impede a federal officer in the conduct of her duties. Obstructing an FAA inspector carries severe penalties both for individuals and for the airline. A hush had fallen over the immediate vicinity of the gate. Passengers who had been annoyed now looked intrigued, some with dawning comprehension and a touch of vindication on Imani's behalf. Thorne swallowed hard. "Inspector Walker," he began, his voice now strained, overly polite. I apologize. There has clearly been a misunderstanding. A grave misunderstanding." He shot a furious, panicked look at Brenda, who looked like she wanted the floor to swallow her whole. "There has been no misunderstanding on my part, Mr. Thorne," Imani said coolly. "I understood the situation perfectly. The question is, do you understand it now?" She held his gaze for a moment longer, then slowly, deliberately put her credentials away. "I will be conducting an observation of your cabin crew's pre-flight procedures and then taking my assigned seat. I trust there will be no further flags." "No, Inspector, absolutely not," Thorne said hastily, almost tripping over his words. "Please proceed. Brenda, scan Inspector Walker's pass. Now." Brenda, fumbling and visibly shaken, took Imani's boarding pass WTIH, a trembling hand. She scanned it. This time, miraculously, there was no issue. The machine beeped its acceptance. "Welcome aboard, Inspector Walker." Brenda mumbled, her voice barely audible, her eyes downcast. Imani gave a curt nod. Without another word to either Thorne or Brenda, she walked down the jet bridge. But as she stepped onto the aircraft, she wasn't just thinking about the cabin crew or the Dallas audit. She was thinking about Brenda Jenkins, Marcus Thorne, and the culture at Global Skyways that allowed such an incident to occur. The badge had opened the door. But the inspection, Imani felt with a chilling certainty, was just beginning. And it would now encompass far more than just ground operations in Dallas. The atmosphere on Global Skyways Flight 712 was subtly charged, at least for Imani. As she walked down the aisle to her seat in row 12, she could feel the lingering tension from the gate. She didn't make eye contact with TAE flight attendants greeting passengers at the door, but she registered their slightly stiff smiles. News, especially bad news involving supervisors and potential federal oversight, traveled fast in the closed environment of an airline. Imani settled into her window seat, her mind a whirlwind. The blatant unprofessionalism and thinly veiled prejudice she had just experienced were deeply troubling. It wasn't just a personal affront. It was a symptom of a potentially flawed organizational culture. If frontline staff felt empowered to behave tart way, and supervisors were quick to defend rather than investigate what other more critical safety issues might be overlooked or covered up, TAH. Anonymous tip about DFW's cargo handling suddenly felt even more ominous. She watched the lead flight attendant, a woman named Sarah, go through the pre-flight safety demonstration. Imani noted her professionalism, the clarity of her instructions, but there was a faint tremor in her voice, a slight hesitation that suggested she was aware of the inspector on board situation. The flight took off without incident, climbing smoothly through the Atlanta haze. For the first hour, Imani focused on her planned work, reviewing the details of the DFW audit. She meticulously organized her notes regarding the anonymous tip allegations of improperly secured cargo containers, rushed loading procedures to meet tight turnaround times, and even falsified weight and balance manifests. These were serious accusations, each a potential link in a chain leading to catastrophe. But the incident at the gate kept replaying in her mind. Brenda Jenkins' sneer, Thorne's dismissiveness, the casual, "you people." It wasn't just about bias, it was about a fundamental breakdown in professionalism and accountability. a nagging feeling began to grow. Her original mission was Dallas, but the issues she'd encountered started right here in Atlanta with Global Skyways personnel. An FAA inspector's purview wasn't limited to one location or one specific complaint. They were empowered to investigate any safety concern they encountered. About halfway through the flight, as the cabin service was winding down, Imani unbuckled her seatbelt. She needed to stretch her legs, but she also had another purpose. She made her way towards the rear galley, ostensibly to ask for some water. Two flight attendants, including Sarah, were tidying up. They looked up as Imani approached, their expressions carefully neutral. "Excuse me," Imani said politely. "Could I trouble you for a glass of water?" "Of course," Sarah replied, reaching for a cup. As Sarah filled the cup, Imani's gaze swept the galley. Standard equipment, everything seemed stowed correctly. Then her eyes fell on a small, almost hidden access panel near the floor, close to the rear service door. It was labeled Cargo Hold Access, Maint Only. Most passengers would never notice it. It was a small, secondary internal access point, rarely used, primarily for specific maintenance checks or in very particular emergency scenarios, to inspect the aft cargo hold from within the pressurized cabin, though not for entry during flight. Something about it looked off. A slight misalignment, a barely perceptible gap along one edge that shouldn't have been there. "Thank you," Imani said, taking the water. She took a sip, then casually gestured towards the panel, WTIH her chin. "Just curious, that panel, is it common to see it slightly ajar like that?" Sarah frowned, glancing where Imani indicated. "Ajar it shouldn't be. It's always supposed to be flush and locked." She leaned down for a closer look. Her frown deepened. She ran her fingers along the edge. "That's odd. It feels loose." The other flight attendant, younger and clearly nervous, peered over Sarah's shoulder. "Does it have an indicator light in the cockpit? If it's not secured?" Imani asked, her voice calm, betraying none of the sudden alarm bells ringing in her head. An improperly secured cargo access panel, even an internal one, could have implications for cabin pressure, integrity, fire containment, or even security if it allowed easier unmonitored access to the cargo hold during flight. However unlikely that scenario. More likely, it indicated a maintenance lapse, a failure in pre-flight checks. Sarah straightened up, her face pale. "Yes, there should be. If the primary cargo doors aren't secure, we get a major warning. For this internal panel, I'm not sure if it's on the primary EICAS engine indicating and crew alerting system display, or if it's a more subtle maintenance alert, but it definitely shouldn't be loose. Would you mind asking the cockpit crew to verify its status form their end?" Imani requested. "And perhaps you could check if it's logged in the cabin defects logbook." Sarah nodded quickly. "Right away." She picked up the interphone to call the flight deck. Her voice was low, urgent. Imani waited, her mind racing. The tip was about Dallas ground crew and cargo. Was this related? Was it a sign of systemic sloppiness within Global Skyways that extended from gate agents to maintenance crews? After a moment, Sarah hung up the phone, her expression troubled. "The first officer says there's no specific alert for that internal panel being unlatched, only for main exterior cargo doors. He said it's considered a tertiary check, usually confirmed by maintenance. He asked if we could try to secure it." "Let's take a look," Imani said. Sarah crouched down and carefully pushed on the panel. It clicked, but then sagged open again by a few millimeters. She tried again. Same result. "The latch isn't catching properly, sir," she announced, her voice tight with worry. "It feels stripped or broken." Imani knelt beside her, examining the mechanism as best she could without tools. The latching mechanism, a simple turnkey type, was indeed not engaging. It was either damaged or had been improperly secured during the last maintenance check. While not an immediate catastrophic danger like an unsecured main cargo door, it was a significant finding. It represented a breach in the aircraft's internal integrity, a failure of maintenance protocol, and another black mark against global skyways. This needs to be written up immediately upon arrival, Imani stated, her voice firm. And it needs to be inspected by ground maintenance before this aircraft flies again. Sarah nodded, clearly shaken. Yes, Inspector, of course. Imani returned to her seat, the glass of water forgotten. Her investigation, she realized, was rapidly expanding. It started with prejudice at the gate, was fueled by an anonymous tip about Dallas, and now a physical safety discrepancy found mid-flight. This was no longer just about Brenda Jenkins or Marcus Thorne. This was about a potentially compromised safety culture within global skyways. Enad Imani Walker was now on a mission to uncover every facet of it. The turbulence she had experienced at the gate was nothing compared to the turbulence she was about to create for the airline. Her report would not just detail the obstruction of a federal officer, but would also include this new, tangible safety flaw. The karma for global skyways was about to get a lot harder, and it would start the moment they landed in Dallas. The rest of TAE flight to Dallas was thick with an unspoken tension. Imani, now hyper-aware, found herself cataloging every minor detail: the slight delay in a cabin crew response, a flicker in an overhead light, sounds from the aircraft that she might have previously dismissed. The discovery of the faulty cargo access panel latch had sharpened her focus to a razor's edge. It was a tangible piece of evidence, a clear safety lapse that went beyond subjective interpretations of employee behavior. Upon landing at Dallas/Fort Worth International Airport, DFW, as the plane taxied towards the gate, Imani was already formulating her next steps. She would, of course, allow passengers to deplane. Then, she would inform the flight crew that she was officially grounding the aircraft, pending a full maintenance inspection of the panel and a review of its service history. She would also need to contact her regional FAA office immediately to report the obstruction incident in Atlanta and this new safety finding. As the seatbelt sign dinged off Sarah, the lead flight attendant approached Imani's row. Her face was still pale, but her demeanor was professional. "Inspector Walker," she said quietly, "Captain Miller would like to speak with you in the cockpit once the passengers have deplaned, if you have a moment." "I was planning on it, thank you, Sarah," Imani replied. "And thank you for your prompt attention to the panel issue." Sarah managed a small, grateful nod. "We just want everything to be safe, Inspector." Once the last passenger had shuffled off the jet bridge, Imani made her way to the front. Captain Miller, a man with graying temples and tired eyes, and his first officer were waiting. The cockpit was a hive of muted electronic hums. "Inspector Walker," Captain Miller said, extending a hand. "David Miller, this is First Officer Tom Chen. Sarah informed us about the aft cargo access panel. We've already made a preliminary log entry." "Captain Miller, First Officer Chen," Imani acknowledged, shaking their hands. "The latch mechanism is clearly compromised. It's not securing. As such, I am instructing that this aircraft be taken out of service immediately upon reaching the gate, pending a full inspection and repair by qualified maintenance personnel. It is not to carry passengers until Tatlatch is certified airworthy." Captain Miller nodded gravely. "Understood, Inspector. We'll inform operations and maintenance as soon as we're chocked. Frankly, we're glad you spotted it. That's a sneaky one. not something on our usual pre-flight walk-around for the cabin's side, and as Tom said, no direct cockpit warning unless the whole door frame was compromised, which it isn't. It speaks to a potential lapse in maintenance checks or prior sign-offs, Imani stated. I'll require access to this aircraft's recent maintenance logs, specifically concerning that access point and related structures. They'll be made available to you, the captain assured her. Now about your boarding experience in Atlanta. Sarah also mentioned you encountered some difficulties. His tone was cautious but concerned. Imani's expression hardened. Difficulties is an understatement, Captain. Captain, I was subjected to unprofessional conduct, baseless accusations, and what I can only describe as obstruction by gate agent Brenda Jenkins and customer service supervisor Marcus Thorne. Their actions delayed my boarding and were indicative of a severe lack of judgment and potential bias. Captain Miller exchanged a worried glance with his first officer. I am very sorry to hear that, Inspector. That is not the standard we expect from Global Skyways employees. I assure you, I will be filing my own report on this matter, corroborating your need for access and the issues you faced. I appreciate that, Captain, Imani said. I will be filing a formal report with the FAA on multiple grounds, the obstruction by Ms. Jenkins and Mr. Thorne and this separate airworthiness concern with the access panel. I trust Global Skyways will cooperate fully with the ensuing investigation. Investigation. You will have our full cooperation, Miller stated firmly. As Imani deplaned, she saw Marcus Thorne's Atlanta counterpart, the DFW station manager for Global Skyways, waiting anxiously at the gate, clearly having been radioed ahead by the captain. His name was Jim Olson, and he looked like he'd just been told his world was ending. Inspector Walker, Olson said, approaching her with a forced, nervous smile. Jim Olson, station manager. Captain Miller radioed ahead. We understand there's an issue with N471GS and some concerns from Atlanta. Mr. Olson, Imani said, her tone leaving no room for pleasantries. Aircraft N471GS is to be grounded immediately. I want a full maintenance team to inspect the aft internal cargo access panel. I also need a secure office space with a phone line and access to a computer. I have several calls to make and reports to file. Olson's smile vanished. Grounded, of course, Inspector. Whatever you need. Right this way. He was practically wringing his hands. The financial implications of a grounded aircraft, the potential FAA fines, the hit to their on-time performance statistics, all of it was likely flashing before his eyes. He led Imani to a small, sterile office, tucked away behind the bustling Global Skyways customer service desk. As soon as the door closed, Imani was on the phone to the FAA Southwestern Regional Office and then to her direct superior in Washington, D.C. She recounted the events with meticulous detail, Brenda Jenkins's accusatory tone, the "you people" comment, the demand for her to step aside without cause, Marcus Thorne's dismissive attitude, his attempt to coerce her into an undefined additional security verification, his threat to deny her boarding. Then she detailed the discovery of the faulty cargo access panel latch, a separate but equally damning issue. Her superior Deputy Administrator Harrison listened intently. Imani, this is outrageous, he said, his voice tight with anger. The obstruction alone warrants a severe response. Combined, WTIH a potential airworthiness directive on one of their aircraft. Global Skyways is in for a very rough ride. Document everything. Everything. will be initiating a formal investigation into their gate procedures, customer service training, and now their maintenance protocols on that aircraft type. Consider your DFW ground crew audit expanded. I want a top-to-bottom look at this airline's culture, starting with Atlanta and that aircraft. Understood, Imani replied. I'll also need the passenger manifest for Flight 712. There were witnesses to the gate incident. It'll be sent to you. Stay in Dallas as long as you need. We're backing you 100%. After the call, Imani began typing her initial report, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Every word was chosen with precision, every fact laid out with cold, hard clarity. The names Brenda Jenkins and Marcus Thorne featured prominently. The identification number of the aircraft, N47GS, was noted. The specific failing of the cargo access panel latch was described in technical terms. Outside the small office, Jim Olsen was frantically making calls, his voice hushed but urgent. The ripples of Imani Walker's presence were spreading. The initial tremor at Gate E37 in Atlanta had now become a seismic event, shaking the foundations of Global Skyways' DFW operations. The ground had shifted, and the airline was beginning to feel the first terrifying jolts of the hard karma that was rapidly approaching. The safety of their passengers, the integrity of their operations, and the conduct of their employees were all under the unflinching gaze of the FAA, personified by one resolute inspector who refused to be silenced or sidelined. The days that followed were a blur of intense activity for Imani Walker and a period of escalating panic for Global Skyways. True to Deputy Administrator Harrison's word, the FAA launched a multifaceted investigation. Imani remained in Dallas for nearly 2 weeks, meticulously overseeing the inspection of N471GS and spearheading the initial inquiries into Global Skyways' DFW operations. Her original audit, now imbued with far greater urgency and scope. The maintenance crew at DFW confirmed Imani's finding the latch mechanism on the aft internal cargo access panel of N471GS was indeed broken due to metal fatigue and improper installation during its last heavy maintenance check 3 months prior in a Global Skyways maintenance facility in Kansas City. It hadn't been caught on any subsequent line checks. This discovery immediately triggered an FAA Emergency Airworthiness Directive, EAD, requiring all operators of that specific aircraft model worldwide to inspect those internal panels within 72 hours. Several other aircraft, including 2 more in Global Skyways' fleet, were found with similar, less critical latch issues, validating the seriousness of Imani's find. N471GS remained grounded for 5 days, undergoing repairs and extensive secondary checks, costing the airline hundreds of thousands in lost revenue and repair costs. Simultaneously, a separate FAA team descended upon Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. Their focus, the conduct of Brenda Jenkins and Marcus Thorne, and the overall customer service and security protocols at Global Skyways Atlanta Hub. Brenda Jenkins was interviewed first. Faced with sworn statements from Imani, corroborating accounts from several passengers who had been in line, contacted via the manifest Imani had requested, and the damning testimony of Captain Miller regarding her agitated state when he was informed of the inspector issue, Brenda's defensive bluster quickly crumbled. She initially tried to deny the "you people" comment, then claimed it was misunderstood. But the evidence was overwhelming. She was immediately placed on administrative leave by Global Skyways, pending the outcome of both the FAA and their own internal investigation. Marcus Thorne's interview was even more grueling. As a supervisor, he was held to a higher standard. His failure to de-escalate, his dismissive attitude towards a legitimate concern, and his attempt to intimidate a passenger who turned out to be a federal inspector painted a picture of gross incompetence and poor judgment. He tried to shift blame, suggesting he was backing his employee and dealing with a stressful situation. But the FAA investigators, armed with Imani's precise account and the airline's own CCTV footage from the gate area, which, while without audio, clearly showed Imani's calm demeanor versus Brenda's agitation and Thorne's confrontational posture, were relentless. Thorne, too, was placed on administrative leave. The karma, however, was just beginning to land. For Brenda Jenkins, 2 weeks after the incident, Global Skyways, under immense pressure, formed the FAA and, facing significant negative internal reviews, terminated Brenda Jenkins's employment. The official reason was gross misconduct and violation of company policy regarding customer interaction and security protocols. The FAA also sent her a formal letter of correction, a black mark on her aviation career record, making it exceedingly difficult for her to find similar employment with another airline. Her casual cruelty and prejudice had cost her her job and her reputation. The smirk she wore when threatening Imani was long gone. For Marcus Thorne fared slightly better, but only just. He was not terminated, but he was demoted from his supervisory role due to a significant pay cut. He was required to undergo extensive retraining in conflict resolution, cultural sensitivity, and FAA regulatory compliance. Essentially, he was sent back to basics. He was also issued a formal warning from Global Skyways that any further such lapses would result in immediate dismissal. The FAA also cited him in their report for his poor handling of the situation, a stain on his professional record. His ambition to climb the corporate ladder at Global Skyways had hit a very solid, very hard ceiling. For Global Skyways, the airline itself faced the most significant repercussions. 1. Fines. The FAA levied a hefty fine against Global Skyways, totaling over $1.2 million. This was broken down into violations related to obstruction of an FAA inspector in the performance of her duties, failure to ensure proper aircraft maintenance procedures related to the cargo panel latch, inadequate training and oversight of gate personnel, leading to discriminatory practices. 2. Mandated training overhaul. Global Skyways was ordered to conduct a complete overhaul of its customer service and security training programs for all frontline staff and supervisors nationwide. This new training, developed in consultation with the FAA, had to include robust modules on unconscious bias, de-escalation techniques, cultural competency, and the specific rights and identification of FAA and other federal aviation officials. 3. Operational audits. The airline was subjected to a series of rigorous unscheduled FAA audits across its major hubs for the next 18 months, covering everything from gate procedures to maintenance logs to crew scheduling. Their every move was under a microscope. 4. Public relations nightmare. Though Imani's identity as the specific inspector was kept confidential in public FAA releases, the story of an FAA inspector being improperly challenged and the subsequent grounding of an aircraft for a safety flaw found by that inspector inevitably leaked to aviation news outlets. Global Skyways, under FAA scrutiny for gate incident and maintenance lapse, became a headline, damaging their reputation among travelers and industry peers. They were forced to issue a public apology, not specifically detailing Imani's case, but acknowledging lapses in customer service standards and maintenance protocols, and outlining the steps they were taking to rectify them. Systemic changes. The Emergency Airworthiness Directive, spurred by Imani's discovery of the faulty latch, led to a small but significant design modification recommendation by the aircraft manufacturer for future builds, and a revised maintenance checklist item for existing fleets globally. It was a quiet testament to the importance of her vigilance. Within global skyways, the Imani Walker incident, as it became known internally though, her name was never officially used in company-wide memos, served as a harsh wake-up call. New reporting channels were established for employees to flag concerns about discriminatory behavior or procedural violations without fear of retribution from direct supervisors. The message from the very top of Global Skyway's corporate structure was clear: the culture had to change. Safety and respect were not negotiable. Imani Walker, back in her DC office, read the final FAA report and the summary of actions taken against Global Skyways with a sense of grim satisfaction. It wasn't about revenge. It was about accountability. It was about ensuring the systems designed to protect millions of passengers a day were upheld, not undermined, by individual prejudice or corporate negligence. Her ordeal at Gate E37 had been stressful and infuriating, but it had ultimately led to positive systemic changes that would hopefully prevent others from experiencing similar treatment and more critically enhance aviation safety. The anonymous tip about DFW cargo operations, which had initially brought her to Dallas, also bore fruit. Her expanded investigation there uncovered several procedural violations, leading to disciplinary actions against 3 ground crew members and a local supervisor, and a tightening of cargo handling protocols at that station. The hammer of karma had fallen not as a single strike, but as a series of well-aimed blows, reshaping policies, ending careers built on arrogance, and reminding an entire airline of its profound responsibilities. And it all started because one black woman, an FAA inspector, doing her job, refused to be dismissed. The tremors from the Imani Walker incident, as it was cautiously and unofficially whispered within the corridors of Global Skyways, did not subside quickly. Instead, they rippled outwards, creating aftershocks that touched not only the airline directly involved, but also echoed through the broader aviation industry. The FAA's decisive action, the substantial fines, the mandated overhauls, and the very public, though anonymized in official releases, narrative of an inspector being obstructed while uncovering a legitimate airworthiness issue became a potent case study discussed in hushed tones at industry symposiums and aviation law seminars. Other airlines quietly reviewed their own protocols for interacting with federal officials, their legal departments suddenly very keen on ensuring their frontline staff understood the gravity of such encounters. Trade publications, ever hungry for cautionary tales that could be spun into best practice advisories, ran articles on navigating on-ground federal interactions and the high cost of ignoring internal red flags, subtly referencing the Global Skyways saga without needing to name names. Within Global Skyways itself, the incident had seared itself into the corporate memory. Unofficially, some Atlanta-based employees started referring to new de-escalation and identification protocols as the E37 standard operating procedure, a grimly humorous nod to the gate where the drama had unfolded. The message was clear: such a debacle could not and would not happen again. Imani Walker, for her part, continued her demanding schedule. While she made no specific effort to avoid Global Skyways for official travel, if it was the most logical or only option, the few times her duties necessitated her presence on one of their flights were palpably different. The moment her FAA credentials were presented, a near-comical wave of hyper-politeness would wash over the gate staff. Smiles became wider assistance, more fervent boarding processes smoother than silk. On one occasion, a gate agent, upon seeing her badge, actually paled slightly, and then insisted on personally escorting her onto the aircraft, offering to stow her bag as if she were royalty. Imani, maintaining her professional composure, would politely decline the more excessive gestures, though a private wry amusement often touched her lips. It wasn't the deference she sought, but the underlying understanding, the stark awareness that professionalism was paramount. Tart signaled a shift. She also noticed subtle changes in cabin crew interactions, a more diligent approach to pre-flight briefings among themselves, a heightened attentiveness that suggested the training was at some level sinking in beyond mere surface compliance. The mandated retraining programs at global skyways were indeed a monumental undertaking. Launched with considerable internal marketing and an emphasis on a new chapter in customer excellence and safety. The initial rollout was met with a predictable spectrum of reactions. Seasoned employees, particularly those who felt they'd seen it all, grumbled about sensitivity overkill or being taught how to do jobs they'd done for 20 years. The modules, designed in painstaking consultation with FAA recommendations and external diversity and inclusion experts, were intensive. They included recognizing and mitigating unconscious bias in high-pressure environments, advanced de-escalation tactics for customer-facing roles, federal aviation personnel identification rights and professional courtesies, and even role-playing scenarios meticulously crafted to mirror the nuances of Imani's encounter, as well as other challenging interactions. Facilitators, often a mix of HR professionals and experienced aviation trainers, had to navigate this initial resistance with skill. They shifted the narrative from punitive correction to professional enhancement, emphasizing that these skills were not just about avoiding FAA penalties, but about creating a genuinely safer, more respectful, and more efficient operational environment for everyone. Slowly, attitudes began to shift. Anonymous post-training surveys, implemented as a crucial feedback mechanism, started to reflect this change. Comments evolved from begrudging acceptance to genuine acknowledgement of value. "I now have a clearer understanding of how to verify different types of official credentials without causing offense," one agent wrote. Another supervisor noted, "The module on microaggressions was eye-opening. I realize I may have unintentionally made people uncomfortable in the past." The metrics showed a steady climb in employee confidence when dealing WTIH complex situations, and a greater reported awareness of the impact of their communication. The FAA, true to its word, kept global skyways under a magnifying glass. The initial 18 months were characterized by a series of rigorous, often unannounced audits that kept every department on high alert. Station managers spoke of sleepless nights before potential FAA visits. While the intense pressure was undoubtedly stressful for the airline's staff, it also fostered a new level of diligence. Maintenance logbook accuracy improved demonstrably. Baggage handling procedures were tightened. Even the average call wait times for customer service saw a marginal improvement as processes were streamlined under the spotlight. The journey to rebuild trust was long and expensive, requiring significant investment in technology training and personnel, but slowly Global Skyways began to turn a corner. Its internal culture and external safety record showing tangible signs of positive evolution. Imani, meanwhile, continued to dedicate herself to the broader mission of aviation safety. The Atlanta incident, stripped of personal identifiers but retaining its core lessons, found its way into her training presentations for new cohorts of FAA inspectors. She would recount the scenario not as a dramatic war story, but as a practical illustration of the multifaceted challenges they might face, the importance of maintaining composure under duress, the necessity of clear and assertive communication, the critical skill of observation that could uncover issues far beyond the initial presenting problem, and the unwavering ethical responsibility that came with the federal authority. "Your badge gives you access," she would tell them, her gaze sweeping across the room of eager, sometimes apprehensive new faces. "But it's your professionalism, your integrity, and your courage that will determine how effectively you use that access to uphold public safety. Never forget the weight of that responsibility, or the impact, positive or negative, your actions can have." She rarely thought of Brenda Jenkins or Marcus Thorne as individuals anymore. There was no lingering bitterness, no desire for retribution beyond the professional accountability that had been served. They were, in her reasoned assessment, individuals who had made poor choices within a system that at the time had failed to adequately guide or correct them. The consequences they faced were the direct result of their actions. Imani's focus had always been larger on the systemic flaws, the cultural gaps, the potential for prejudice to erode professionalism, and by extension, safety. It was nearly 18 months after the Global Skyways flight when Imani attended a major aviation safety conference in San Diego. During a networking luncheon, amidst the clatter of cutlery and the murmur of 100 conversations, a young woman approached her table. She was an aerospace engineering student, her eyes bright with intelligence and a touch of nervousness. "Excuse me, Inspector Walker," she began, clutching a conference program. "I hope I'm not interrupting. My name is Aaliyah Jones." Imani offered a welcoming smile. "Not at all, Ms. Jones. Please. I read an anonymized account of an incident some time ago." Aaliyah continued, her voice earnest. "It was about an FAA inspector, a black woman who faced a really difficult situation with an airline, but stood her ground and ended up uncovering some important safety issues. The article didn't name you, of course, but someone in my mentorship program hinted it might have been you. Reading that, it meant a lot to me. As a black woman hoping to build a career in this field, sometimes you wonder, you hear stories. That story, though, it gave me a huge boost. It showed me what's possible, that we can hold our own and make a real difference. A profound sense of warmth, quiet and deep, spread through Imani. This was the echo she cherished, the aftershock that truly mattered. It wasn't about the apologies or the fines. It was about this, the spark of inspiration in a young woman's eyes, the validation of her own often challenging path. "The aviation world is dynamic and demanding, Aaliyah," Imani said, her voice gentle but firm. "There will always be challenges for everyone. Sometimes for women, and particularly for women of color, those challenges might present themselves in unique ways. But your skills, your passion, your dedication, those are what define your capabilities. Never let anyone's limited perception define your potential or your place. There is not just a place for us, there's a critical need for diverse voices and perspectives if we are to achieve the highest standards of safety and innovation." She paused, then added, "That story you read, it was about doing the job thoroughly and without compromise, regardless of the obstacles. Hold on to that." Aaliyah's smile was radiant. "Thank you, Inspector. Thank you so much." As the young woman walked away, her step visibly lighter, Imani looked out over the bustling conference hall. She thought of Gate E37, the ugly confrontation, the steely resolve she had been forced to summon. But now that memory was interwoven with this newer, brighter one. The turbulence had been severe, a personal storm within a professional maelstrom. Yet, it had ultimately forced a course correction not just for an airline, but in the subtle currents of industry perception. Her badge, a symbol of federal authority, had been the key that opened a locked door. But it was her unwavering commitment to her duty, her refusal to be intimidated or diminished had pushed that door wide, allowing the light of scrutiny to flood in and cleanse some shadowed corners. The flight path to true justice and comprehensive safety was never a simple ascent. It was a continuous journey of vigilance correction and an unyielding belief in the possibility of clearer skies ahead. And every so often an encounter like the one with Aaliyah Jones reminded her that the journey, however arduous, was profoundly worthwhile. And there you have it, a stunning example of professionalism under pressure and the incredible impact one person can have when they refuse to be silenced. Imani Walker didn't just fight for her right to board a plane. She fought for accountability, for respect, and ultimately for the safety of countless passengers. The hard karma that hit back wasn't just about punishment. It was about forcing real systemic change within global skyways. What did you think of Imani's incredible composure and the airline's ultimate reckoning? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of justice, and resilience resonated with you, please give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you don't miss our next deep dive into compelling real-world dramas. Thanks for watching and fly safe.